everybody, Chris Parody here. Today I'm going to be teaching you to play an arrangement I made of George Gershwin's Summertime. You can download the tab for free on my website. There's a link to do that in the video description. So as we start off on this one, we're going to make an A minor 6 chord, and we're going to do that by fretting the 5th fret of the low E with our middle finger, the 4th fret of the D with our index, and the 5th fret of the G with our ring finger. So that should sound like that. And if we move that chord up a whole step so that we land on the 7th and the 6th fret, we get to an E7/B chord. So that's an E7 chord with a B in the bass. That's what the slash means, if you haven't come across that before. And we're going to be shifting back and forth between those two chords quite often in this one. So in that first measure, if we wanted to just focus on our bass line and what the thumb is playing, the thumb's going to be alternating from string 6 to 4 as we move back and forth between those two chords in measure 1. So that's what we'll hear in the bass. Now we're going to sprinkle some other melody notes and some filler notes around those bass notes. The melody notes are going to start in the preceding measure, so there's a 3-note pickup in this song. It would be and, for, and of that pickup measure. So we count that 1, 2, 3, and, 4, and. So if we're counting it in, playing it with others, that would be how we'd want to do that. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1 as we come into measure 1 there. So those melody notes are right out of our chord shape because the first melody note is our open high E string. I'm playing that with my ring finger on my picking hand. And then my index finger picks the 5th fret of G, which is part of the chord shape. And then I'm back to that open note. Okay, now I'm just going to get into the bass note, that first bass note of measure 1. Between those first two bass notes, I'm just picking the G string again with my index finger. So again, all just out of the chord shape so far. Okay, now I'm going to move up a whole step to that E7/B chord. I'm going to pinch strings 6 and 3. I'm going to play that open high E string on the and. Then I'm going to come down for my next bass note on the 4th string, 6th fret, still out of that chord shape. Okay, the last note you see in measure 1, I'm moving back to the other chord shape, and I'm going to grab that 5th fret of G out of that shape again. One thing to notice already is that the only melody notes we've played are those first 3 pickup notes. Summertime. Everything else we've done is just rhythmically filling in the space using our picking hand and the chord shapes. That's going to be a pretty constant theme throughout the song. If you were to sit there and sing, whistle, hum the melody to Summertime and keep the beat, you're going to notice that there's a ton of space where the melody is not active. And we're going to fill in that space in a number of different ways. You can play around with that a lot as you play the song more and more and find all sorts of variations that might not be specifically what I'm telling you to do in this arrangement. So it's a good thing to take note of and think about throughout the song is where are the melody notes and where is the melody not saying anything, and we're having an opportunity to just play the rhythm and be the rhythm section basically on the guitar, just keeping that rhythmic aspect of the song going. All right, measure 2 is going to start on that A minor 6 chord. We kind of got back into that shape by the end of measure 1. And we're going to begin measure 2 by playing string 6 in the bass with our thumb. Then we're going to play the first string open with our ring finger, 4th string with our thumb, 3rd string with our index finger. So that would give us, if we counted that, it'd be 1 and 2 and. Okay, this next part of the measure, we could return to that E7/B chord, and in a lot of versions you might hear that chord just repeat here. I like to throw a little twist in, which sometimes appears in lead sheets for the song. I really like the sound of this. It just adds something new and a little bit dissonant, which is instead to go to a B-flat 7 chord. And to do that, I'm going to fret the 6th fret of the low E, the 6th fret of the D with my index and middle finger, the 7th fret of the G with my ring finger, and that's going to give me a B-flat 7 chord there. Now, in the measure itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch string 6 and 3. I'm going to play the open high E string, which that's a melody note. And And then keeping my middle finger on the D string, my other two fingers are going to release. My index is going to come to the 5th fret of the G. I'm going to pinch those notes together on beat 4. And then I'm going to make a little jump down the neck. My ring finger is going to land on the 2nd fret of G, which is going to allow me to get into an A minor shape to head into measure 3. Okay, so the second half of that second measure would sound like this. And the timing there would be 3 and 4 and... Let's figure out what the melody is doing in that measure. We're basically playing the melody on the following notes. It would be and the living is E. And then we're going to finish that EZ, that second syllable of EZ, in the third measure. So, important to note that open high E, the 5th fret of G, the 7th fret of G, the open high E again, the 5th fret of G, and the 2nd fret of G. A lot of melody notes in that measure. So that one's a little bit more active. The first measure, really nothing was happening in the melody. We were just filling in space. This one, we're having to be a little bit more precise about what we're playing because we're trying to really have that melody jump out nice and crisp. That 2nd fret note at the end of measure 2, that was leading us into an A minor shape. And we play that note, which brings us into the open 5th string, the bass note of that A minor chord to start measure 3. And we're going to play that note, followed by the 2nd string, middle finger picks there, and then our thumb comes down and plays the 2nd fret of the D string. So that would be starting on that 2nd fret note that finishes measure 2. It would sound like that. And good to think about getting there, right? You're going to kind of land that ring finger note. Ideally, you're just going to get all your fingers into that A minor shape right away, but focus on that ring finger note first because that's going to be the melody. Then you still have that open string to give you a little bit of time to kind of get everybody settled into the chord shape there. So it's good to kind of practice, I think, getting to that note and then landing the rest of the fingers into A minor. Okay, now on the second beat and here, so we're on the and beat of 2, we're going to play the open G string, and that's going to bring us into an E major chord. So we can actually just, even though we're mainly focusing on hammering onto the 1st fret of G, we might as well just get the whole E chord on there. And after we hammer that note, we're also having to pick the open low E string at exactly the same time that hammered note is happening. So if you've seen some of the other videos, this is a technique that's popped up before. It's a really tricky one if you haven't done it before. So just in case that is true for you, try to practice as soon as that hammer goes in, you also want your thumb to play that low E string. So it's good to do what I'm doing right now. Break it into a tiny little action and try to time those two things together. So as this hand is coming inward, this hand is going down. So I've used this motion to describe it in the past. It's really tricky at first. So that's why it's good to just do that for a while. After you do that enough, every time that technique pops up in a song where you're hammering and having to land a bass note on the hammer, or it could be with a pull-off, it starts to get really easy to do that without having to spend a ton of time on it. It's usually just those first few songs where that pops up and you're going to have to give it some special attention. After the hammer and the bass note, you're just going to play the open high E string and then drop your thumb to play the 2nd fret of the D string, which you're getting out of your E major shape. Let's pause there. There is one more note in measure 3, that open G string, but that's really going to be kind of leading us into measure 4. So let's hear measure 3, but let's start on that 2nd fret of the G string, which is the last note of measure 2. So that would be measure 3 with that little lead in from measure 2. Okay, one little interesting note there is the melody is kind of pushed back a little bit the way we're picking that there. Because think of it like this. The notes we're really looking for in the melody, it's pretty simple. That first note that we started on is E, Z. So that 2nd fret of D is the 2nd syllable of easy. But we don't really hit that until that 4th beat. E. So we probably want to hear it here. Z. But I just kind of push it back to the end of the measure. and it just kind of suits what we're doing in the rhythm there. So we still hear that note, it's almost coming on a little bit of a delay, or it's almost kind of just implied in a way. So that's a little bit of an exception to what we've done so far, which is staying pretty direct with where the melody's going. As we go into the fourth measure, let's start, like I said, we left off that open note that you see at the end of measure 3. And that open note is just going to be bringing us back into an A minor chord there. Same technique we discussed in the last measure. I'm actually playing that open G string. I'm hammering onto the 2nd fret of G, but I'm actually going to hammer my whole A minor chord in there. And when I hit the 2nd fret, I have to hit my open A string in the bass. Then I'm going to play the B string with my middle finger. I'm going to drop my thumb to play the bass note on the 2nd fret of the D string, and then I'm just going to play the open A string again. Like that. So other than that hammer-on, that's pretty simple, and it's mostly the bass. So those last 3 melody notes, the open high E, the 5th fret of G with the index, the 7th fret of G with the ring, those are leading us into D minor. So after that 7th fret of G, we're going to play, leave that finger there, we're going to play the open D string, and our middle finger is coming onto the 6th fret of the B string. You probably recognize this as part of a D minor triad. You don't have to have that index finger down there on the 5th fret, but having a familiar chord shape you can relate it to can make it easier to just kind of figure out where your fingers need to go here. So after that open D, that 6th fret note is going to be on the and of 1. And then I'm just going to pedal my bass note here for the 2 and. So if I start on that last melody note and then take myself into that first half of measure 5, it would sound like that. Okay, now we're going to do this classic little D minor run here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slightly change my fingers. My ring finger is going to replace the middle so that the middle can go to the 6th fret of G. I'm going to pinch all 3 of those notes together, the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd string. I'm going to play another bass note after that. Okay, now my index finger is going to play the 5th fret of G. I'm going to pinch all 3 notes. And then to finish that on the and of 4, I'm going to bring my index finger back to the 4th fret. Okay, let's hear that all come together. And that's going to sound like that. I added one more bass note at the end of that as I was playing it just now. That was the first note of measure 6. Okay, now continuing into measure 6 there, that's the only bass note we're going to play. So you notice again too, I was just keeping my D bass the same the whole time in that 5th measure, just pedaling that drone bass there, not alternating to any other notes, because we're doing a little bit more on top of the chord, so we'll just keep the bass line simple there. The only bass note we're going to play in that 6th measure is going to be that open D note, which is really just kind of landing that D minor run that we did in measure 5. After that, we're not going to play another bass note. We're just going to let the melody really step to the forefront of this measure. So the rest of it is just playing that. And good moment here to just note that the only note that's not part of the A minor pentatonic scale in the whole melody is that B note there at the end of the melody here. And the cotton is high. Otherwise, you can find all the notes of the melody just in the first box of the A minor pentatonic scale. It's a great little exercise you might do on the side. Even though we're not playing it all right out of that box in this arrangement, we're moving some of the notes, we're playing some of the notes as open strings, but still good just ear challenge. See if you can find those notes and just play them as a melodic soloist. If that's easy for you, then maybe you come up to a higher position and figure it out there. So, nice little side challenge. And again, just a good thing to note that that only non-pentatonic note in the whole melody is that open B note, which we finish measure 6 with. Now that note ties us into measure 7, and we're going to be heading into an E7 chord. Now this time it's just a regular E7 that we're going to go to, so very similar to earlier, except since we're not on E7/B, that middle finger, instead of being on the B note in the bass, it's going to be on the E note on the 7th fret of the A string. And that B note, again, that's tying us into that measure, so if we start on the final melody note there of measure 6, then our thumb is going to come down and play the bass note, as our index finger picks the 3rd string, all right out of the chord shape, including this note when the thumb comes down to play the 4th string in the bass. Okay, then we're just going to move that fingering up 1/2 step to the 8th and the 7th fret, which is going to bring us to an F7. We're going to pinch 5 and 3, play 3 an extra time on the and, so 3 and 4 as the thumb comes down to play the D string in the bass, and then move back for the final note of that measure, that 7th fret note that ends the 7th measure, and you're going to play that 7th fret of the G string with the index finger. So that measure would sound like this. Kind of leaves us hanging a little bit. It's also a very dissonant measure because we're going to that F7 chord, taking us back to the E7 and then back to A minor, which is going to resolve all that tension, but very tense part of the song. So when you're playing this part, it might sound a little weird if you're going slowly because there's so much dissonance. But once it comes together, as you heard at the beginning of the video, it works really nicely and kind of just ramps up the tension there for a moment. After we played that 7th measure and we come back to that 7th fret, we're back into that E7 shape. So we're just playing that 7th fret, that's the last note of measure 7, and that's going to lead us into 5, 1, 4, 3 on the first 2 beats of the 8th measure. So picking with all the same fingers we've been using so far. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to move that middle finger back up to the 7th fret of the low E string. So we're just getting a little alternating bass in there. And it'll sound like that. Okay, then just move back into that A minor 6 position, and that's going to set you up, or pretty much back to the pickup notes here. So we're actually going to be repeating the first 3 measures of the song after those pickup notes again. Measure 12 is almost the same as measure 2. There's just a couple subtle differences. One of them is really simple. So if we start on the open string that leads us into that measure, we're going to hammer on from that open G string onto the 2nd fret of G. We're just going to throw that whole A minor shape. So up to that note, 1 and 2, up to the 2nd beat of that measure, it's exactly the same. And the first very little change is on the and of 2, we're going to pick the G string 2nd fret right out of that A minor shape, and then our thumb is going to return to the 5th string open in the bass. So that little note there on the and of 2, that 2nd fret of G, is just added into this measure. Really simple difference from the 4th measure, and it's just a little bit of rhythmic filler. It's a variation that we can throw in there. So not too tricky, also not too important. You could add that note, you could leave it out, doesn't really matter. The important thing is the very final note of this measure, which you see is the 2nd fret of the D string. You've already fretted that note as part of your A minor shape. That's the main change in measure 12 from measure 4, is that the melody's changing as it brings us into the final phrase. So measure 4 ended with these melody notes, but measure 12 is just ending with this melody note. So again, otherwise, pretty much the same with that little rhythmic filler note. As we come into measure 13, you're going to shift into a C chord shape, and you might as well just leave all your fingers where they are so that you're just moving that ring finger up to get into a C chord shape. You're going to start by pinching the 5th and 3rd string on the first beat. Okay, then we're going to have this little walking bass line, so we're going to shift our fingers so that the ring finger replaces the middle finger, and the middle can then move up to the 2nd fret of A. It's going to give us a B in the bass with our melody note. We're going to play the open G on the and of that. So actually picking wise, we might want to use our middle finger there on the G string note. So we pinch with thumb and index, and then we could play the G string with the middle finger. because usually we're going to be playing the song at a slow pace, it's not a huge deal if you just drop the index. If it was a song with a much faster tempo, we'd probably want to really try to use a different finger each time, but you can experiment. That's not too important there technique-wise, in my opinion. Okay, then from that C/B chord, we're just going to drop the middle and ring finger back down into A minor. We're going to pinch 5 and 3. We're going to play the second string on the and of 3, and then our thumb comes down to finish the bass. So that'll sound like that once it comes together. Lyrically there, we're hearing, so hush, little baby. Measure 14 is going to bring us to a D7 chord. So the easiest way to get to D7 is go to your C chord, add your pinky to the 3rd fret of the G string to make it a C7, move that up 2 frets so that you're now on frets 5, 4, and 3, and that's going to give you a D7 chord. Once you get that chord there, you don't have to do anything else with your fretting hand. It's all in your picking hand. You're going to pinch 5 and 1, play the second string on the and of 1. Okay, drop your thumb to the 4th string for your second beat of the bass. Play the 3rd string on the and of 2. So that would be 1 and 2 and. Okay, now we're heading up to an E7. We're going to stay in this chord shape, so just move your fingers up 2 more frets. So now you're on 5, 6, and 7. And you're going to pinch strings 5, 3, and 2. And then play the open high E string on the and of the 3rd beat there, so that'd be 3 and. Okay, now keep your middle finger where it is. Move your index finger up to the 5th fret of the G string, and you're just going to pinch those 2 notes together. And that's going to lead us to the final note, which is the 2nd fret of the G. Just like earlier, we're going to get our ring finger there so that we can get into an A minor as we start measure 15. All right, now that we come to the final 2 measures here, pretty simple because we're just going to be repeating what we played on measure 11 and 12. So that 2nd fret of the G strings leading us back into A minor, E, A minor. Only tiny difference is right here as we are getting to the end of that final measure. The melody, again, is changing because it's actually bringing us back to the top of the tune. So we're going to come back up to our A minor 6 chord, and we're going to play the open high E, the 5th fret of G, right out of that chord shape, and then the open high E again. And now we're ready for the next repetition of the song. All right, well, thanks for making it with me this far. I hope you've enjoyed learning this arrangement of Summertime, that you have fun as you get to know it more and play it more often. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you soon to learn another song together.